Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel. As Stephanie mentioned, today we're going to be talking to you about building long-term pro bono relationships through creative clinics. But first off, thank you to the ABA and CILA for coordinating this wonderful symposium. It's been really great to hear from different panels about best practices and strategies across the country from everyone doing this collective work. And also happy Friday. I hope you all had a wonderful week. And we're really looking forward to closing out the symposium today and sending everyone into their weekends. So by way of introduction, my name is Catherine Krasilnikoff. I'm the Deputy Director for Pro Bono Partnerships with Kids in Need of Defense, or KIND, and I'm based in California. I previously worked in our San Francisco and Fresno offices for 7.5 years, focusing on pro bono recruitment, training, and mentorship in Northern California for unaccompanied children in both the released and detained settings. I now work with KIND across all our US offices on pro bono programming with a focus on the West Coast. And I'll pass it to Salma for a brief introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salma Hassan. I'm a managing attorney for the Released Children's Program in KIND's Houston office. Our release program focuses on representation of unaccompanied children, both through direct representation as well as through mentorship of pro bono attorneys. Part of my role includes overseeing our pro bono efforts locally in Houston, and I've been recruiting and training and mentoring pro bono attorneys for almost 9 years now, including prior to joining KIND.
Thank you, Salma. So our panel today focuses on time-limited clinical opportunities that benefit unaccompanied children, with the particular lens of transitioning these opportunities into full scope representation by pro bono attorneys. And we're looking forward to sharing with everyone and collaborating with all the organizations and attendees. The next slide, please. So a quick overview of the agenda. In this panel, Salma and I will be giving a background on KIND, and then dive into the core content, providing an overview of pro bono clinics, benefits and best practices, and common clinic models for representing unaccompanied children. A lot of the other wonderful presentations have touched on similar concepts, and we're happy to share how these have worked in our pro bono model, particularly in a changing immigration landscape. We'll leave some time at the end of the session for questions, but please feel free to ask questions throughout, either through the Q&A feature or in the chat. We'll do our best to monitor as we go through it. Next slide. So first, I'll provide some background about KIND for those that are not familiar with our organization. Next slide. So KIND is an international nonprofit. We were founded in 2008 by the Microsoft Corporation and Angelina Jolie to address the gap in legal services for unaccompanied children. KIND's headquarters are in Washington, D.C., and we now have offices and staff across the United States, Mexico, and Europe. Our team and KIND's network of private sector pro bono and NGO partners provide unaccompanied children with innovative holistic care that includes legal representation and assistance in psychosocial support. Through our strategic partnerships, KIND provides pro bono legal representation for forcibly displaced children across the United States, and we work to replicate this model abroad. We partner with governments, international organizations, NGOs, and the private sector to instill that shared commitment to the protection of unaccompanied children and separated children through training, technical assistance, and capacity strengthening. We opened in 2008, and since then we've received referrals for tens of thousands of cases, children that have been protected through direct legal assistance, and also by leveraging the pro bono legal resources provided by hundreds of law firm, corporate, law school, and bar association partners. Our field offices in the United States provide mentorship to pro bono attorneys in representing unaccompanied children, and each case is assigned a KIND attorney who offers subject matter expertise. They answer substantive legal questions. They provide extensive samples and guidance, offering case strategies. We review filings, and also preparing attorneys for hearings and immigration interviews. Similar to some of the other organizations at the symposium, we do not co-counsel on cases, but we do provide very hands-on mentorship to ensure that the representation of the child is successful both for the client and also for the pro bono partner. Through our comprehensive psychosocial support programming, KIND complements our legal programming by bringing a holistic approach to protecting children on the move alone. Beyond the U.S. borders, KIND's Mexico-based offices and programming in Central America work with partners on the ground to address the root causes that force children to flee for safety, protect children throughout that journey, and also connect repatriated children to essential services upon return. Through our European initiative, KIND and partners in Belgium, France, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Poland, and the UK work to ensure access to high quality pro bono legal assistance for unaccompanied children in Europe and to advocate for systemic reforms to support protection of children on the move. That's a broad overview of KIND's work. Our panel today is focusing on clinic models in the United States for unaccompanied children that are seeking legal relief, such as asylum or special immigrant juvenile status. Next slide.
All right, so like Kiki mentioned, I know that we have heard from some others on using the clinic model as well, but we'll start off with the basic of touching on an overview of the pro bono clinic model. So starting with what is a clinic? It's a time-limited opportunity for pro bono attorneys to work on a discrete portion of a case. We'll go into more detail later in the presentation on different clinic structures, but it really depends on the type of clinic that you might have planned. Generally, we do start off with a training, and then we have portions that focus on drafting and working with the client, and then as well as a section focusing on finalizing the work product. Our role as the LSP, as the legal service provider, is to provide support and feedback as the volunteers work through the project. And the goal of the clinic is to actually produce some sort of filing, some sort of tangible work product that will be beneficial in the long run to the client as well as to the LSP. A big goal is also to recruit new attorneys and engage current ones so that we can lead to long-term representation of unaccompanied children. So that leads me to talk about the benefits of the clinic model, one being pro bono recruitment. The fact that it's a time-limited commitment is a huge draw for attorneys, especially those who are afraid of being stuck with a case for a good 6 to 10 years. And unfortunately, that is the reality of our cases right now. It's also a networking opportunity and a co-counseling opportunity for the volunteers. We don't co-counsel with the attorneys, but they have a chance to volunteer with others in the community, partner together on a case, and just that fact alone can be a big incentive for our volunteers. It also gives a glimpse into what full-scale representation can look like. And it gives them an idea of what kind of support they can expect from us as well. So for those who might be interested, but maybe a little bit unsure, this can give them a taste of representation. Because we have our own staff on site as they work on the project, it can also be reassuring for pro bono attorneys who maybe want more hands-on support as they dive into representation. And as I mentioned earlier, it helps keep pro bono volunteers engaged and can sometimes even lead to volunteers wanting to donate, maybe organize some sort of donation drive. So it can spur other types of interest as well. The benefit to LSPs or to us is that it can help prevent burnout and vicarious trauma. Sometimes we can give our own staff a break by setting up a clinic because what's happening in the clinic may be something that the staff would otherwise be responsible for. A clinic can also be an efficient use of resources and time in that you're preparing multiple cases at once, providing guidance to multiple attorney teams in one setting. And then once you've done one clinic, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And so you're preparing other similar clinics, that may take place in the future. And that takes less work. So it compounds the efficiencies basically as well. Another aspect is that it can be a professional development opportunity for staff who get to present and teach Not just the attorneys, but even the paralegals or other support staff in your office might have an opportunity to participate, coordinate, share their knowledge. It can be a fun opportunity for them as well. And so I think that's another nice thing about clinics. And it's also just a major benefit is that you can engage in these sort of opportunities. As you engage in these opportunities, it increases the likelihood of getting attorneys who may be interested in a full scope case engaged down the road. Finally, one of my favorite aspects of clinics is that it can give structure and allow a pro bono attorney to complete their case in a timely manner. It gives us a little bit more control over the speed in which a case is moving. So aside from those types of benefits, another key benefit to the clinic model is that it's an opportunity to help incorporate cultural responsiveness as well as trauma-informed practice into the regular practice of a pro bono attorney, particularly because the volunteers will be interacting with clients during these sessions. So it ensures a successful experience for all of the participants, particularly the clients, but it also carries forward into the practice of attorneys with future clients as well outside of the clinic. So it's important to be clear with the firm about your expectations from the start. When you're starting to plan out the clinic, you should be setting expectations about the client population, the nature of the relief you'll be working on, how traumatic experiences may be discussed during the clinic, how part of the clinic will be focusing on preparing attorneys for incorporating cultural responsiveness and trauma-informed practice. Set that up from the get-go. And then during the training portion of the clinic itself, make sure you're discussing practical tips, providing context to what their clients might be experiencing, why they may respond in a certain way, how to address those situations. Sometimes you may have some info ahead of time on particular cases that you can point out those dynamics, prepare the pro bono attorney ahead of time, use it as an example. But because we often don't know what will arise during the conversations, it's good to generally be prepared to discuss things like cultural and linguistic barriers, economic and educational differences, distrust of the system, fear of removal, and all the various things that we see day to day, the new family dynamics, living with people they have not lived with for years or maybe have never lived with, being in a new country, being in a new school, that kind of thing. Even after the training portion is over, because we're right there, the LSP staff is right there, it's also an opportunity for us to be there to answer questions in real time. So they can easily step out of a meeting with a client, a session with a client, as something comes up and ask questions, and we can kind of walk them through how to address it or provide context in real time. Volunteers can also see how we're interacting with the clients as they come into the clinic, or how are we addressing in real time anything that comes up, right? And so it's a way for us to be able to model for our pro bono volunteers as well how to navigate certain situations or just navigate working with a child. And then, of course, at the end of each session, there's usually some sort of debrief period where they can take some time to reflect on their experience, and then we can also provide feedback. So that's also an important part to make sure you're bringing in, this practice. So that brings me into the planning portion of the clinic. So we'll talk about what some of the best practices are. When it comes to planning out a clinic and identifying which type of clinic you might want to conduct, it's really important to look at what will actually benefit your clients as well as your organization. Don't just plan it for the sake of doing a clinic. Make sure there's actually something you're getting out of it. So if you have a chunk of cases in a similar posture, that's usually a good indication that it could be a useful clinic. So, for instance, we have some examples here. If you need to intake a mass amount of cases, staff is burning out, maybe an intake clinic is the solution here. You've recently placed a lot of cases, maybe a launch clinic is the solution, or you have a lot of straightforward SIJ cases. You can think about doing a state court clinic, or even if new things come about, right? Like maybe it's not necessarily something you're on the lookout for in your own cases, but something like deferred action comes about suddenly, and that results in multiple cases suddenly needing the EADs. And so the C14 EAD clinic could be an idea. And so we have ideas of regular clinics that we would talk about, but always be on the lookout for new changes in policies, new things that come about that could prompt the idea for a new clinic type. But the point is that it has to be about balance. It takes work to put together a clinic. So you want to ensure that the outcome of the clinic is going to be a benefit to the client in the long run, so that it's worth the work that goes into it. Once you know what kind of clinic you want to do, then it's time to also identify who you might be conducting the clinic with. So we've talked about how time limitation is an incentive for partners, but you have to think about who's mentioned interest in short-term engagement, or maybe who has talked about who maybe you've struggled to place a long-term case with. So they may not have said, I want short-term, but maybe you're struggling to place a case with them to begin with. That could be somebody to target with a short-term clinic opportunity. You also want to look at who may already have experience or internal support of some sort, especially when you're starting out doing your first few clinics. It can be helpful to work through the details and the growing pains of creating a clinic with someone who has a lot of internal resources. A firm with little pro bono support or little space may not make sense to work with on a clinic, especially as you're first starting out doing those. In terms of pitching clinics to pro bono partners, it's really important to be transparent from the get-go. Make sure that they understand the timeline, the end goal, what you will be providing, what you need from them, what they'll be getting out of it. Suggest a phone call to discuss in more detail if they're interested. It's a lot to pitch just by email unless you've already done clinics with them before, so make sure you're having more detailed conversations with them. Once you get them engaged, make sure you're going into detail about all of the logistics that go into the clinic, so that they can, that builds transparency, it builds trust even in within the firm for you as the LSP, and that can build long-term relationships as well to show that you're very organized, you're thinking through all of the pieces of how the clinic will be structured. So one is talking about the structure, the work product, what you will be working on, how many people are participating, what are their roles going to be, what is the limit to how many volunteers you can have, do they want to be partnering with anybody on this clinic? Are there interpretation needs? How much physical space do they have? Are there expectations for food? Food is a big selling point for clinics, so I always recommend having that. And then also, are you going to have things, entertainment for the clients, or things like fidget toys and coloring items for our young clients? Also, make sure you're thinking about any administrative steps that you might need to complete prior to the clinic, like background checks, conflicts checks, signing consent forms, representation agreements, whatever you might need prior to the clinic. And as well as, again, talking about that cultural responsiveness or trauma-informed lens, giving them context into, who the clients are that will be at this clinic, what their needs will be, preparing volunteers for the possibility of discussing traumatic experiences and learning about vicarious trauma as well. And most importantly, discussing whether volunteers might be able to commit to a full scope case. Being on the same page about this is really important. It can help shape what kind of clinic you ultimately settle on doing together, depending on how much they are willing to commit to a case. Beyond this conversation, you will need to have a point person on the firm's end as well as on your own end to make sure that the coordination is happening on each of these points to get ready for the date of the actual clinic. Make sure it's somebody who has capacity to dedicate time to the planning and all of the internal coordination that goes on. So once you've identified the clinic type as well as the firm that you might be working with, it's time to identify clients for the clinic. Pre-screening is key here. It's how you can ensure that there are more standard fact patterns in the clinic, more similarly postured cases. You want to have less complicated cases depending on the type of interaction needed. Of course, you can't, necessarily, sometimes things just come up in the clinic and that's fine, that happens, and we should be prepared for that. But for the most part, if you can find the more quote unquote standard cases, that's really what's easiest for the clinic and for the participants. And so just make sure you're asking the right questions during the pre-screening to try and avoid certain scenarios that will complicate the case later on. Explain the clinic model to the client as well. So once you've identified the client, you need to talk to the client about participating in the clinic as well. It's not just about engaging with attorneys. So, you want to make sure they understand what they're participating in and give them agency to decide if they even are willing to do so. And get any consent forms signed ahead of time that you might need from them, as well as any relevant paperwork that you might need from them ahead of time. And then just make sure you're also providing very clear instructions for before the clinic, how to get there, what to expect, instructions on what's going to happen during the clinic, and then of course what the next steps will be after the clinic, because each one may end in a slightly different way. And I think every organization may have a different way of handling the final outcome of the clinic as well, depending on their own models. And then just make sure that you map out the details for yourself as well. So, have the agenda mapped out, have your roles really written out in detail so that it can help yourself identify anything that hasn't been addressed ahead of time. It's helpful for the firm to know ahead of time what they need to do and what they can expect the day of. And it really helps your own staff as well that might be participating in the firm. It can, give them a sense of what to expect. It'll also give them the opportunity to make sure that they're addressing whatever their responsibilities may be towards the clinic that day. So make sure that you have your own little milestones of where you should be leading up to the clinic, and then have check-ins with your own staff to make sure you're meeting those milestones, as well as check-ins with the firm to make sure that they are addressing everything as well. And so I think, so we have this sample agenda here, and I believe we did provide that in the materials as well. This is, for a generic clinic, but you would tailor it to the specific type of clinic that you would be doing, but it should be a great starting point for everyone. I really recommend making sure you're mapping all of this out. And so that actually brings us to common clinic models for representation of unaccompanied children. And so, we're going to talk about a few specific examples of clinic types that you might have with unaccompanied children. I think it's important to think back about when we discussed the needs of the organization and the clients at the time, because there could be many other types of clinics that may make sense based on sudden changes or developments in the cases. But we're going to go through these most common forms for today's purposes. Starting with our intake clinics. These can range from anywhere to 5 to 15 clients in a session, so they can be quite large. But again, it really depends on the need as how many intakes maybe you need to get done, how many referrals you may have coming in, as well as what the capacity is for the firm, or wherever you are hosting the clinic. So for every client that's there, you may need a separate meeting space, and so you want to make sure that it matches whatever space you're using. And so the amount of clients may depend on that, as well as maybe the time that you're able to dedicate towards the clinic and how many staff members you might have who are able to assist with the clinic, as well as, of course, the volunteers, how many volunteers you have. The purpose of an intake clinic is for the volunteers, the attorneys, to interview the potential client, essentially learning how to do screenings for legal relief. This gives them a glimpse into the facts of the case. They can incentivize attorneys to take on representation of the client. That's something we hope for always, but we don't require them to actually take the case in an intake clinic. Non-legal volunteers can participate as well. Paralegals, other non-attorney staff, they can help with interviews, maybe help incentivize the attorney that they work with to take the case. But they can also maybe provide interpretation, help with other logistics in planning out the clinic, be the ones greeting the clients or staying with them in the waiting areas. And so there are ways that other non-attorneys can also participate in the clinic and stay engaged. We do require attorneys to participate, even if there are non-legal non-attorneys participating as well. And then usually these are half-day sessions, either starting in the morning with breakfast, or maybe doing a lunchtime training and then going through the rest of the afternoon or the rest of the morning. Intake clinics will typically start with simultaneous trainings. Volunteers are getting trained on legal relief, how to interview children, best practices, things like that. At the same time, clients will get their Know Your Rights presentation from one of our staff members. And then if you have volunteer interpreters there, they may also get an interpreter training as well. All of these happen at the same time so that they can then roll into the actual client interviews. We also have social services coordinators in our office. And so the really nice part about intake clinics is that while the child is being interviewed by the attorneys, the volunteer attorneys, sometimes we can have simultaneous sessions with our social services coordinators for the sponsors so that they can talk about just different, resources in the community and things like that. And then following all the interviews, we'll do a debrief session with the attorneys, talking about relief, discussing next steps. And hopefully the attorney will say, I loved this experience and I'm interested in taking on the case. But either way, they would write out a case summary after the fact and really prepare all of that so that we can place the case with them or with another future pro bono attorney who's interested in taking the case. In a nutshell, they're moving through the intake process that normally our own staff would be doing. The hope is that they'll feel a connection to the client, learn a little bit about legal relief, and hopefully get excited about seeing where the case goes to the point of wanting to take a case. State court case clinics. This is my new favorite type of clinic, so I'm very excited about it. We have tended to keep these a little bit smaller than intake clinics just because they do require some more attention to detail in terms of moving through each stage of the case and moving through the legal procedure. Pro bono attorneys will essentially get trained on state court, work on drafting filings, conduct client meetings, provide drafts for us to review. It can be really any variation of this, and I'll touch more on that, what I mean by that momentarily. Non-legal volunteers can help with clerical items. Paralegals and interns can participate in drafting and working with the clients in conjunction with the attorneys. We were able to time a clinic in Houston at the start of this last summer so that summer associates could take the lead under the supervision of attorneys. You could time it for when new associates join the firm, or the beginning, the end of a firm's fiscal year when they're looking for pro bono hours. So the beautiful part of a state court clinic is you really it can take place at any time during the year, as long as you give yourself and the firm time to really plan out the sessions according to what works with everyone's calendars, and what works time commitment wise. In this model, the attorneys commit to taking the case, or at least a portion of the case. And what works best really is that you keep it as a time limited opportunity, just focusing on state court, or maybe state court with ending with the I-360 filing. But in theory, I think it could also work where they're taking on the full case. Or I know it can work because I actually did this, but they take on the full case, but the clinic just focuses on state court while the attorneys independently work on the rest of the case outside of the clinic. So, if the client qualifies for asylum or has immigration court, they're still handling that part, but the clinic is only focusing on getting state court done. But in either scenario, the attorney really should be the one signing the representation agreement ahead of time, doing any other administrative tasks ahead of time, so that they're ready to really get started on state court when they get to the clinic. We would pre-identify cases in a similar posture for the clinic and assign it to the firm, but then the firm would be the one to assign the cases internally, see who's going to be the ones participating in it, handling the logistics of scheduling the clients because it's their client, and then that's nice because then the coordination piece is a little bit more shared than say in an intake clinic. And it's a little less is required on our end than ahead of time for, from our perspective. Logistically speaking, you can do a state court clinic as just one session focused on a particular type of filing. So for instance, just doing one focusing on the petition to get them started on the case, or maybe focusing on service or what have you. Or you can do a series similar to what I think Alexa was proposing earlier, where you go through multiple stages over the course of weeks or months. So, the one session, it can be tailored according to what the firm particularly is interested in getting from the clinic. Maybe they know about, filing petitions, but they're a little bit rusty on affidavits or on citation by publication, and they want a session focused particularly on that. You can tailor that for them. Or you can have clients attend the session, or maybe you don't have them attend some of the sessions. So if you're doing a series, maybe you start off with them attending, then you have certain ones focusing just with the attorneys when getting the drafting done, and then they meet independently with the client on the actual finalization and signing of the documents. So, maybe where it's hard to coordinate with multiple clients for multiple sessions, it could make sense to only time some of the sessions to have client involvement and have some of that happen independently outside of the clinic. You should really look at what you want out of the firm and what the firm needs from this type of clinic structure. But I mean, I could go on and on about this type of clinic, but it's a great one. It can keep cases moving. It really ensures things don't stay stalled, which is why I love it. We know how important getting an early priority date is for our clients, and sometimes getting a pro bono attorney to really understand the significance of that timing is challenging. And so a state court clinic can help control the pace and quality of the work and sets the client up for the next stage in a great and engaging way. I'll pass it off to.
Thank you, Salma. Yeah, I'm also of the same mindset. My current favorite clinic is a state court clinic. So if anyone wants to connect with us on how those have worked, they've been really appealing to pro bono partners. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but all the children that we're intaking are likely eligible for some form of relief. And so it's a great way of kind of expanding representation for those children and moving those cases forward, knowing that they are eligible for relief. It's just an access to counsel issue. So I'm going to talk about launch clinics. They sound similar to what was in the previous presentation. The speaker was talking about cohorts, which I really like that phrasing and may adopt that. But unlike the other clinic models in our presentation today, the launch clinics are tools that we're utilizing in the full scope representation model. They're not time limited opportunities, but they're presented as a clinic, which has been really appealing to pro bono partners. It's a great recruitment tool to place a certain number of cases at one time. We typically do this, it really depends on the pro bono partner, but you typically do this in the size of 3 to 5. And we've seen a lot of interest in them being timed with the start of summers or first years at the firm that can really get the case rolling, get some experience, and also work with associates or partners at the firm and start building those relationships. The goal of the launch clinics is really twofold. On the organization's end, we're looking at how can we increase our efficiency in mentorship and also increase our pro bono placements for children that are in need of representation. For our pro bono partners, the clinics have been appealing in that they provide a clear structure for starting a case and help build a foundation and some momentum for moving similarly postured cases forward. There's that power and that collective momentum. And I think also on, pro bono counsel's end, it provides them with some peace of mind that there's, some kind of system for oversight and getting these started. So they're not having to worry about cases lingering or people not getting off the ground on their cases and them having to backtrack later on. In this model, similar to the state court clinic, pro bono counsel at the law firms work to identify a certain number of cases that they will be taking on and teams that will be representing these clients, whether that's 1 to 2 associates, maybe a partner for oversight, maybe they want to add on someone for administrative support, such as a paralegal, if there's interest. But those teams are representing these clients and the pro bono counsel is providing the logistical support and oversight on their end to ensure that everything goes smoothly. Most of the pro bono attorneys that we work with have no immigration experience, maybe some one-off clinic work that they worked on during law school or, have taken some pro bono cases in the past, maybe for a U visa or something where they're interacting with the immigration system. But for the most part, they're starting with no immigration law background. So we're all starting kind of at that same stage of learning. The cases are full scope rep, where the teams are representing the child before the executive office for immigration review and in multiple forms of immigration relief, typically asylum and special immigrant juvenile status. The pro bono teams work with kind in advance of the actual launch clinic day to select the cases they would like, knowing that they're going to have these cases for the length of, whatever form of relief they're applying for. And as Selma's mentioned, and we all know that sometimes can be very lengthy. So I think it's really helpful to have calls in advance of case selection to be really transparent about what the case will entail. You want to highlight any potential challenges in a client's case, whether that's a nuanced legal argument that they'll be making and you'll be providing support in, or whether it's a more practical challenge that impacts the representation, such as lack of sponsor support or maybe a lack of a potential guardian, transportation issues, housing instability, significant past trauma, or any kind of cognitive challenges that you want the pro bono attorney to be aware of. This transparency in the case selection process ensures that the team is fully informed of what they're volunteering for. They know right up front and can anticipate roadblocks that may come up and are likely to come up later on down the line. It also ensures a really good foundation for the mentoring relationship moving forward, knowing that we're going to be interacting in this mentoring relationship for quite a long time. You want to build that strong foundation and be really transparent and clear about expectations on both ends. Once the teams have selected cases in the launch clinic, they receive the child's full case file and an intake memo based on the intake that Kind staff has already conducted that outlines the child's roadmap to legal relief. The case file includes any documents the child brought with them at the time of intake, usually their birth certificates, notices to appear, ORR verification of release forms, and documents from the Office of Refugee Resettlement that they were given upon release from a shelter. Teams also receive a series of documents and resources to provide some background on working with unaccompanied children, and how to incorporate trauma-informed and culturally responsive practices into their representation. As part of the launch clinic, Kind coordinates a training in advance of that that's specific to this cohort. I'm using that term, it's specific to this cohort. That will, it can be either in person or virtually, depends on, what the culture is around that at the firm, and I think really where we are in the pandemic. But that training focuses on that first client meeting and the documents that they'll need to prepare in advance, such as the EOIR 28, retainers, and working with pro bono counsel to ensure that they have some kind of standard retainer that they're using, and then relevant FOIA and record requests. The teams receive samples of these documents to use as a base for drafting and getting feedback from their Kind mentor in advance of the clinic day. We ask that that happens in advance. The materials we provide also include a draft outline of how to conduct their first meeting and tips for how to build rapport with their clients. It's such a critical meeting, and I think, attorneys, pro bono attorneys who've never worked with a child before, have never worked with an immigrant, tend to be really nervous. And so providing that kind of those samples and outlines and support leading up to it, and reviewing a draft of their outline of how they plan to proceed is really, really helpful. The actual clinic day of the launch clinic is the client's first meeting with their pro bono teams, and all clients are scheduled to meet on the same day at the same location. Kind coordinates with the clients and communicates in advance of what the day will look like. The law firm provides confidential meeting rooms and arranges for interpretation, either through interpreters at their firm, volunteers, or through paid interpretation vendors. On the clinic day, Kind staff provides an overview to the clients and sponsors of how the day will proceed. As Salma was mentioning before, it's also, if you have social service programming in your office, it's a great way to incorporate that into the day. Whether that's a presentation, a Know Your Rights presentation, maybe it's, school's about to start and maybe there's a donation drive around back to school kind of backpacks and school supplies on, your relevant school districts list. I think making it as fun as possible and welcoming as possible makes it a really great kind of launch to the case, both for the attorneys and for the clients as well. They're likely nervous too. Before the attorneys meet with their clients, Kind staff attorneys meet with them and answer any last minute questions. And then the attorneys proceed to have their first meetings with their clients. Kind attorneys are present throughout the day. The meetings usually last around 2 hours. And Kind staff is able to provide guidance and answer questions that come up either from the pro bono teams or the clients. You can also flag any social service needs and go through what that referral process looks like if you have that programming within your office, or if that's a referral to an external provider. At the end of the meeting, attorneys let their clients know what happens next steps. Kind staff can also talk to clients if they have any kind of lingering questions or concerns. But in most cases, this is the end of the clinic model. It really is kind of this just launch clinic and getting those cases started and building that momentum. But I think there's also some really creative options to proceed with other similar clinic days if the firm is interested. You could do a state court training and drafting session, office hours. You can also look at structuring, the cases, the full scope of the cases in clinics. So, maybe you're doing a launch clinic and then they're all SIJS eligible. So maybe going into an abbreviated version of a state court clinic, then an I-360 clinic, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I think, I clearly love clinics, but I think it's a great way to structure the cases again and really build that momentum and drive those cases forward. The launch clinics in particular are a great way to really ensure there's a warm handoff from Kind to the pro bono attorney, and that both the client and the pro bono partners are supported at such a critical transition point. I know when we do the intakes in our offices, whenever I do an intake, I want to keep that client. That's why our intake clinics are so successful, having that one-on-one connection and really hearing about that client's story. I think I have some, I'm always hesitant to kind of pass it off to a pro bono partner. So it's a really kind of nice transition and also ensures that those relationships are built and everyone has expectations around what the rules are moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to our I360 clinics. I alluded to them in the previous slide, but these are a model that we started at the beginning of the pandemic. We were looking for virtual remote opportunities that involved a limited scope of work, and they're very popular during the pandemic, and people keep asking for them. So I think they've been pretty successful. In our organization, we mostly conduct those for direct representation cases where staff attorneys located in our field offices are handling the full scope of case, but may want to be fielding out the I-360 process to a pro bono partner. It eases the workload on our end, but I think it's always a possibility when talking to your pro bono partners, hey, do you want to represent the client in this I-360? It is somewhat time limited. We kind of have a sense of how long the approval will take. And then I think once you get that approval and deferred action, seeing, hey, do you maybe want to take on the EAD and run that in a clinic model as well? So there's lots of options here. But the I360 clinic kind of at its base is a half-day clinic where those pro bono attorney teams are committing themselves to that half day, usually 4 hours. They can be in person or virtual. And the teams are matched with clients who are going to be eligible for an I360 soon. And the pro bono teams receive a packet of documents in advance to review. I think some feedback we got in the past is we had done iterations of this is, thinking around the clinic model, you think of it as a time limited opportunity. And we had been providing the client materials and kind of the samples the day of the clinic, thinking, we'll build in time for them to review. The feedback we got, attorneys being overachievers and OCD and very type A, is that they wanted it in advance. I think that's fine. And we started doing that. And I think just being clear to volunteers that we will build in time for it, but if you would like to review it, here it is. And they, I think, have certainly appreciated that. The file that we send to them is just a small portion of their file. We're not including everything. It's their proposed state court predicate orders. We do these mostly in cases that have upcoming state court hearings. State court declarations to give them some context, and I think also really humanize the client. In most cases, they're not meeting with the client to review and finalize, and I think that's an important element for bringing a human element to who our clients are and what they're facing. It will also include their notices to appear, birth certificates with translations, and the child's or our verification of release form. The actual clinic day starts with a training that focuses on unaccompanied children and the immigration system, cultural responsiveness, and trauma-informed techniques. I think we integrate this into every training that we give. It's an opportunity, again, to humanize your client. I think in the broader context of what we're seeing in the news, it is really helpful for those that are interested in learning more. But also, the purpose and process for filing the I-360 petition for SIJS, how critical that is to get it filed, how it retains a priority date, and kind of what benefit that grants them in the future. After the training, pro bono teams meet either in a virtual breakout room or in person, depending on whether it's an in-person or virtual clinic, and they draft and complete the I-360 petition filing. And kind staff is present to provide guidance and answer questions in real time. We do get a lot of questions during these and kind of have honed our training down over versions of this clinic. But there are lots of questions that come up on the 360. Lots of it is left blank, and I think that can be really confusing for people. But they take that time to draft it, learn about it, and answer questions in real time. This has been a really helpful model for ongoing pro bono work, as the pro bono partners can really develop expertise in a really specific part of the case. So looking, longer term, you can look at repeating these clinics with the same partner, or if you're doing post-clinic surveys, you can ask, would you be interested in, drafting an I-360 for one-off clients outside of the clinic model as they come up, and then retain those volunteers and provide that to your staff so that, I have 5 upcoming state court hearings. Let me reach out to this partner and see if they can see if they can draft this for me. I also think as pro bono partners become more familiar with the SITch process and are filing these and hearing more of what the process looks like, as well as our mentorship model, they may express interest in, taking on the state court portion of the case, wanting to deep dive in that if they're feeling, I'm good on the 360 part. I really want to learn the state court piece and deepen their knowledge and have more client interactions, really, because typically these don't involve client interaction. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so our EAD clinics are similar to the 360 model. And, given the visa backlog for SIJS and asylum interviews, it's been really helpful for our direct representation cases as you're filing multiple EADs over the timeline of a client's case. As I mentioned before, if you're, partnering with a law firm on a 360 clinic, adding on an EAD clinic for the deferred action EAD once the I-360 is granted is a great option, whether that's the same pool of volunteers or maybe they're reaching out to additional volunteers that may have not had capacity when the previous clinic was happening. So that's always an option. In these clinics, pro bono partners are matched with an EAD eligible client in advance. They receive a training that gives an overview of the EAD process and importance of this document for children, even if they're not going to seek employment. I know I don't need to preach to the choir here, but oftentimes we get questions from pro bono attorneys like, my client's 8, they don't need an EAD. And it's like, well, we're not expecting them to work, but highlighting the importance of that document, whether that's for school enrollment or just having some kind of government issued ID. The volunteers, of course, receive a sample application and a limited portion of the client's file. They prepare the application in advance of the actual clinic day, after the training, and kind attorneys review and provide feedback on that filing so that they're ready to go on the actual day of the clinic. The pro bono partners provide confidential meeting rooms and interpreters for the clinic day, and kind coordinates with the clients to have the client attend, make sure they know where they're going, what the security process looks like at the building. But on the actual clinic day, which we typically see as being 3 to 4 hours, the clients meet with the pro bono team to explain the process and timelines, review the application, obtain the signatures, and explain the next steps. And our role as the LSP is being on site to provide that kind of warm welcome and orientation to the clients and to answer questions that come up throughout the day. While draft, similar to the I-360 process, I think, thinking around an EAD application for somebody who's doing this, as their full-time job at your organization, that's a relatively light lift for someone to complete. But I encourage you, and if you're, getting pushback in your offices from staff about, do we really need this? I encourage you to think longer term about how they can be useful tools. So if you're building out these resources and structuring them to repeat the clinics, it can also be a longer term recruitment tool that hopefully leads to a full scope placement as your relationship with the pro bono partner, and specifically the volunteers, because that's going to step up and say, I want that full scope case. As those develop, you want to develop those through these clinics, because it really can lead to some full scope representation, even if that's, a year or two down the line. Next slide, please. Our last clinic that we'll be talking about today is our country conditions clinic. They were also a pandemic era model that we piloted with an eye towards remote pro bono opportunities and also an influx of asylum interview notices for direct representations cases that we were getting under LIFO scheduling. They're a little bit lengthier. They're about 4 to 6 week clinics for pro bono teams of generally 3, I think 3 to 4, and you can include both attorneys and non-attorneys, with the end goal of the clinic being that the pro bono team drafts an annotated table of contents and supporting country conditions in support of a direct rep client's asylum application. These clinics don't involve client interactions, but pro bono volunteers do get exposed to a portion of the client's file and their asylum claim, their motivating factor for leaving their home country and seeking relief in the United States. And I think it's a good introduction to this client demographic and the asylum process. The clinic launches in week 1 with a training on asylum and the importance and role of country conditions in that process. We give an overview, of course, of unaccompanied children and what that process looks like for them specifically. But the training itself, the bulk of it is focused on the country conditions. So annotated table of contents. What are they? How to do them, available resources, and I think how to prioritize and narrow it down. After the training, the teams are assigned a case and receive supporting documents, including a case theory memo and samples that are tailored to that case theory. In some clinics in the past, we've provided a set of country conditions, sample country conditions that we obtained from the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies in San Francisco through their technical assistance program, who really encourage the pro bono attorney teams to look beyond that and do their own independent research. Kind hosts individual introductory calls with the teams to discuss next steps after the training, suggest work distribution. That's been a big question for them, figuring out how this team is going to be structured and to really answer any initial questions that they have. In most cases, that intro call is conducted by the kind attorney who represents the child and then provides ongoing mentorship throughout the 6-week course of the clinic as questions come up. And we build in a 3-week check-in. I just put it on calendar right at the outset of the clinic to review a draft and identify gaps in their work product and provide some kind of guidance and keep that momentum going on that project. The pro bono team delivers the final work product at week 6, which then goes into the client's file in preparation for the asylum interview. So similar to what we talked about before, it's a great clinic to repeat and I think also build expertise with partners. It's also been really appealing, I think, and that there's some flexibility on their end about when they can work on that product or work on that project, and also how to distribute the work. And so it's been pretty popular in many of our offices. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now we have about 3 minutes left. We do have some time for questions, but I just wanted to say, all these clinic models, Selma and I are happy to connect with anyone on them. We've listed our email address here. I think, again, they're a really great way to introduce pro bono partners to smaller pieces of the case, which seems to be a little bit more digestible to partners that have never worked on immigration cases before. So please feel free to reach out. We do have some time for questions and can hang around for those. Feel free to enter it into the chat. Oh, I see one in the chat. So how do pro bono attorneys complete the USCIS forms? I'm guessing not using e-immigration. Yes, correct. So I think in most instances, what we have instructed pro bono volunteers to do is to download it off of USCIS's website and fill out the PDF version, making sure to save it, making sure they can save it. We've had some instances where it hasn't been saving the information, but they download them from uscis.gov and then send over those forms after. Great. Well, again, our email's here. Please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you, everyone, for your attention and contribution to the symposium and kind of the work on a broader level for unaccompanied children. We really appreciate it.